So for the past 20 years in China, I have been criticizing China as the most corrupt, the most unequal, the most materialistic society on the planet. I've been in LA for the past 3 days, and I need to go back to China and issue an apology to the Chinese people. Being in LA for the past 3 days, it really is like setting foot on a Hollywood thriller that is a sci-fi dystopia.
在中国批判了20年腐败与不平等的江学勤教授，在洛杉矶待了3天后，公开说要向中国人民道歉，因为他看到的不是自由灯塔，而是一部科幻惊悚片。帕利塞兹2000万美元的豪宅堡垒与街头毒品泛滥的僵尸末日只隔了几条街。一个敢骂中国最狠的学者，为什么在美国面前突然倒戈？下面看看他的发言。
I was in the Pacific Palisades last night for a dinner party, and the houses there are like fortresses. These huge mansions that are guarded by private security and which are just beautiful. I was in a $20 million mansion, and then I looked up the hill. There's a $20 million mansion. None of these people, Steven Spielberg, Adam Sandler, are neighbors. None of these people know each other. They're all in their own like self-contained universes. At the dinner party, I'm sitting next to Max Blumenthal. He says to me, "Hey, maybe we should go visit Skid Row." And I think that's the best suggestion anyone has ever asked me. So we get in a car, we go to Skid Row in the evening, and it is really the zombie apocalypse. You've got like blocks and blocks of homeless people. There's this black woman who's naked rolling around the streets. A lot of them were on drugs. And it just seems to me absurd that in the wealthiest country in the history of humanity, you could have this desperate form of poverty. At the same time, what's happening is that rather than focus on internal issues, on internal corruption, inequality, the Americans choose to fight these silly, pointless wars overseas. I'm staying at a hotel in Santa Monica. It's a luxurious hotel. I'm literally living with real-life Ken and Barbie dolls, just beautiful people. In the evening, I go out, and it's all just homeless people. And outside my hotel room, there's this man who is homeless, who's mentally ill, and he's just shouting and cursing the entire night. Thankfully, the hotel gave us earbuds, but this is the world we're living in where society is suffering from internal decay. And rather than confront the issue, we just, put on our earbuds and put our hand in the sand and live in our fortresses. But the reality is that this internal decay will just spread and spread, and that's a real threat to humanity today.
What is the difference then between, because I'm in LA as well, I wouldn't see it as quite as stark as you do, but I get your point. But what is the difference between, say, what you're seeing here and China at the moment?
Well, I would say just extreme individualism of the Western world. Whereas in China, we focus on family, we focus on community, so we don't really have much of a homeless problem because we think that, if our brother is suffering issues, we welcome the brother into our household and accommodate him until he gets well. But here in the United States, everyone is left to fend for himself. So if you make one mistake, maybe you're doing well, but you get sick and the healthcare bill overwhelms you, you go bankrupt, then you're on the streets. It is atrocious to think that in the wealthiest society in the world, millions of people are just being left behind. Half the country can't even afford like a $20, $50 emergency.
I'd love to comment on that, if I may.
I mean, Annie Jacobs. I was going to bring you in, Annie, obviously, as an American on the panel. What do you feel about this?
I mean, look, if anyone's looking for a debate, they are not going to get it from me because I completely agree with what Professor Zhang just said. And I live in Los Angeles, and I want to walk my book over to your hotel because, in essence, you just took a major thread of my book and relate it because I address the outbreak in Los Angeles. The outbreak in the United States of America first occurs in Skid Row, precisely for the reasons that you pointed out that I wanted to point out, which is what underpins my narrative on top of being sort of a national security cautionary tale is the fact that America today is like schizophrenic about its own reality of what is happening within its own borders. One of the shocking things that was said to me by a Defense Department official who used to war game these scenarios at the Office of Net Assessment under the very famous Andy Marshall, he said, there is no homeland defense against a biological attack or incident, which is an accident, only something you can do to mitigate extermination. And when you think of that coupled with the scenario, the reality that Professor Zhang just painted about my own city, then you realize America has a really big problem that is only going to explode elsewhere. Precisely what your other guest said, like drawing back from its partnerships around the world. I believe this all has to do with the fact that there is this complete disconnect between reality and fantasy here in the United States. It needs to be addressed or we're circling the drain.
If I might say something?
Professor, yes, you can. I was going to bring you in, actually. I was just going to ask you, Professor O'Brien, before you respond. Well, respond first of all, then I'll put my point to you. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, not for Professor Zhang. I mean, I find that was a very romantic picture of China. China is an oppressive dictatorship. And to somehow present China as that rose-colored society vis-a-vis a very messy Western society, and the United States is a messy Western society, I think completely distorts the reality of between the two. I mean, China, we don't know of what's actually going on in a lot of China because it is quite a dictatorial controlled society. So I would think that we need to step back and have a little perspective on that. I think the real problem in the West is the growth of authoritarian figures. It's because it's becoming more like China politically, with sort of real strong men trying to put in place their individual visions. And we don't have checks and balances like we used to. We don't have the more liberal system that we used to have. So in many ways, we're becoming more like China, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the question I was going to put to you was, as somebody who obviously knows his history, history is littered with seemingly unbeatable empires, Rome being a classic example, which everybody assumed would just go on bestriding the globe like this colossus, but they all end, right? And the big question, I think, for the United States is, yes, it's the greatest superpower we've seen in history, arguably, but I saw the latest debt numbers today, for example, over $40 trillion in debt, United States. Mm-hmm. These are baffling numbers to anybody who understands basic economy. How sustainable is the American business model, do you think? I mean, could America be the modern day Rome and just effectively one day we wake up and it's no longer the superpower we thought it was?
America would dream to be in Rome's financial situation. That's actually a much greater fear to me than this idea that the society will break down. Because the American debt, as indeed the debt in many countries around the world, including in China, when you look at the real estate debt, is basically unpayable now. We can't pay back the massive amounts of money that are owed. For the United States, the debt problem is structurally, it's just going to get larger. So there's no way to reduce the debt unless you completely remake government. And it's hard to see how that will happen. And you've got this structural debt that's going to grow every year, and interest rates are going up. So now they've crept up for a number of years. They're getting up to 20-year highs, what the United States is going to pay. So soon, actually right now, but increasingly, a massive part of the debt will simply be to pay the old debt. And that is going to set off a chain reaction that I am very worried about.
Professor Zhang, I mean, obviously China still owns a large chunk of American debt, which most people don't focus on, I don't think, nearly enough. But in answer to Professor O'Brien's critique,
I've been very critical of the corruption, inequality, and the materialism, the authoritarianism in China. I am the world's foremost critic of the Chinese school system. I've been doing so for the past 20 years, being interviewed by major publications like New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and going to education conferences, pointing out the deficiencies in China's schooling system. So I'm very much aware of the deficiencies in Chinese society. But then I go to a place like the United States, and I go to Skid Row, and never before have I seen such an apocalyptic image where, you have thousands of citizens of the world's most prosperous society and they're just being left to their own devices. The state has abandoned them. And as Annie Jacobson has pointed out, this will be ground zero for any epidemic, because these places are rife with contagious diseases. And so contagious diseases, biological warfare happens not when, society develops a biological superweapon. It happens when society neglects basic sanitation. That's what's happening in American society today. Just because I point out basic problems in American society does not mean I am a communist. And also, when you say that the real problem is authoritarian figures, let's remember back in 2016 how Donald Trump came to power in the first place. It was because in 2008, Barack Obama was brought into power with the slogan of hope and change. At this point, the Wall Street bankers had criminally bankrupted the American financial system, and millions of homeowners were about to lose their houses. And Barack Obama was brought in because people believed that this would be a revolution. Instead, Barack Obama appointed Goldman Sachs executives, people such as Larry Summers, Tim Geithner, and Bob Rubin, and they bailed out their friends on Wall Street. Surprise, surprise. And millions of homeowners were bankrupted. So everything that's happening today is because of Barack Obama's policies, not because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was brought into power as a response to people's frustration with the meritocracy, with the elite, with the callousness of the American elite.
Annie Jacobson, there are lots of different. First of all, respond to that if you want, then I'll ask you a question.
Well, I just think it's important to lay down a few facts here, because I think the problem for me as a narrative storyteller is that if you can't deal with the problems that are happening, if your own house is not in order, the United States of America, how can you project authority overseas? It's essentially sort of hollow. It's hypocritical. Facts and figures on the homeless issue in Los Angeles and why it's so dangerous to something like a biological incident, that would be a lab leak or an attack. There are 4,000 people that Professor Zhang described running around down there on Skid Row. 4,000. All of them are either mentally ill, physically ill, or a combination of both. I interviewed epidemiologists who work there, have told me that the homeless population in America is an extraordinary national security problem. Here's why. There are 800,000 homeless people in the United States for reasons of economics, for reasons of, sanity, of like treat your neighbor well. All those reasons are extremely important in and of their own. But from a biological sort of warfare standpoint, what's interesting is that the government, and this is a metaphor, so stay with me here, the government has spent billions and billions and billions of dollars since 9/11 building up BSL 3 and 4 labs, building up what is called a syndromic surveillance system. We have 7,000 ERs across America that feed data in real time to the CDC so that we can get in on top of an outbreak if it happens. But guess who is left out of that entirely? The 800,000 person homeless population, the most vulnerable way in. And the point that I'm making here is that enemies and adversaries know this. They actually spend a lot of time looking at America's weaknesses. Why isn't America, the average person, willing to see their own problems right in front of them?
江学勤的震撼来自视觉上的荒诞折叠。他在豪宅与好莱坞巨星比邻，转头却看到街区流浪汉、精神病患者和毒品成瘾者。更令他脊背发凉的是制度的系统性冷漠。在中国，家庭与社区是最后的安全网；在美国，极端个人主义将每个人抛入残酷孤军，一场重病就能让中产瞬间破产，沦为游魂。然而，比道德沦丧更危险的是国家战略层面的精神分裂。当华盛顿每年挥霍数万亿对外发动战争，在全球建造生物实验室时，却将国内80万流浪汉完全排除在疾病监控体系之外，而精英阶层的对策仅仅是酒店前台递上一副耳塞。这种掩耳盗铃的治理逻辑，与2026年美国仍在疯狂炒作中国威胁、对华加征关税、将内部矛盾转嫁为外部敌意的行径形成刺眼对照。一个连自家街头都无力安置的帝国，凭什么向世界输出秩序？江学勤的道歉绝非亲华，而是知识分子直面真相的诚实。当美国国债突破40万亿，利息支出创20年新高，当结构性赤字只能靠借新还就维持，罗马帝国的黄昏剧本正在华盛顿加速上演。真正动摇美国根基的，从来不是中国的崛起， 而是华尔街与国会山之间那条贪婪的旋转门，是堡垒里的美国与街道上的美国之间那道越裂越宽的鸿沟。江学勤用3天看清的真相，华盛顿30年都不愿意面对，而这才是一个帝国最致命的傲慢。